In this episode of the Safety Pro podcast, I sit down once again with Alexander Paradies from TapRooT. We talk about complacency, what it actually is, and how management at any company really can handle this common problem that is called out as a root cause of many incidents. We'll get into all that stuff in this episode. If you want to watch the video of the interview, head on over to the Safety Pro podcast community site. The link is in the show notes, and you can watch this video for free. This, of course, is the audio version of that interview. And also, be sure to check out our new book, Rethinking Safety Culture. The link is also in the show notes. This book will help workplace safety pros uncover innovative approaches, practical techniques, and real-world examples to reshape safety practices and promote a stronger workplace culture. That's right, we're going to debunk the safety culture myth. We're going to talk about what it actually is. You might be shocked to find out that we're not completely dispelling with the term safety and culture in the same sentence. However, we have to rethink it. Go ahead and grab your copy of Rethinking Safety Culture today. Let's talk a little bit about our official safety services provider for the Safety Pro podcast. I'm talking about Aero Safety. Our good friend Drew Hinton, who's always a guest on the podcast, and we have some episodes coming up with him, as a matter of fact. Drew and Aero Safety have everything you need to tackle your safety and health problems. You're looking for some training, some additional support. Maybe you're just looking to have somebody come in and do a wall-to-wall inspection, an assessment of your facilities or your safety programs, all things that Aero Safety can do. Go to aerosafetyus.com. Mention you heard about them on the Safety Pro podcast. Get a discount on your first quote. Again, aerosafetyus.com. Thanks, Drew and Aero Safety, for all of your support over the years, and we look forward to collaborating some more on some other topics. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Before we get into today's topic, I have one question for you. Are you still painting your floors for 5S markings, things like that? Don't do that. Head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast, a great partner in safety. They've been with us from the beginning. They have some really good products that are going to get you out of a whole lot of time, material, and maintenance and upkeep. Their floor marking tape is second to none. It takes up easily, doesn't leave a sticky residue. They've got floor tape with beveled edges for forklift traffic, carts, things like that. So it really holds up well to that kind of traffic in your facility. They also can do custom floor signs. If you have a particular logo or a message, they can make that happen. Get a free sample and try it for yourself. Again, head over to mightylinetape.com/podcast. Tell them that we sent you. You will get a free sample to try out in your facility today. Again, mightylinetape.com/podcast. All right. Alex Paradies from TapRooT. Once again, you've become a regular on this podcast, so thank you for that. I know you're busy and you've got that Hawaiian shirt on, so you're probably dying to get somewhere tropical.
Well, we're recording this on a Friday, and it's Hawaiian Shirt Friday. That's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes. So for those who are listening in podcast land, if you head on over to the Safety Pro community site, membership site, the link will be in the show notes. You can watch the full video. You get to see Alex in all of his Hawaiian shirt glory, and with the TapRooT logo, of course. Hey, we were talking last week, beginning of last week, I believe it was, about, we always have various topics we can get into, but we thought for this one we would cover complacency, and that's a very common thing to hear in safety land and our safety world is, hey, complacency kills, or we'll see folks use complacency as a root cause, meaning they were complacent. And it kind of ties into not paying attention, something we talked about before. Complacency is a very specific thing, and I want to make sure we don't lump it into a category of other things like situational awareness,
I mean, because it kind of ties in, because I'm going to let you kind of dive into that, because that's why you're here to kind of feed us this information. So why don't
Yeah,
we
and
just jump right into it?
yeah, so that's a good example. Let's take the difference between situational awareness and complacency. So when we think about human behavior and we think about how people work and interact, when we think about situational awareness, you think about alertness. So when I'm situationally aware, I am noticing what information's coming in, I'm able to process it, and I'm able to make decisions, right? So I'm gathering information. So it's about the human, almost your senses, right? What information I'm collecting, am I able to understand it and make decisions? Complacency, on the other hand, really has more to do with motivation. And it really has more to do with people's ability to follow rules and what it takes to get people to follow rules. So there's a really interesting quote. I know we talked about Rickover when we talked about normalization and deviation, and these kind of come hand in hand here. There's a really great quote by Rickover, and it comes from his congressional testimony. And it was, nothing was final. That was the hardest lesson to learn. Men do not stay trained. No matter how firm or how formally the procedures were promulgated, the insidious and subtle process of erosion sets in. And so his philosophy with management and with leadership was that if you've got rules that are super important, you have to recognize that complacency is going to be a problem. Even the most disciplined of people will over time become complacent. And so that's the thing need to think about is we know that complacency is going to come up even in the most disciplined of us. So what are we doing as organizations to, stop that erosion, and how can we think about correcting that behavior before it becomes a bigger problem, right? We know it's going to happen little bits at a time. So, what do we do to fix that erosion?
And erosion can present itself different ways, right? Can it be drift or operational drift or deviating, or is that different than somebody consciously saying, "Oh, I think I have an easier way of doing this"? Because, like you say, there's we can go in different directions,
Mhm.
and I I don't think we're splitting hairs here. I do think it's important that organizations recognize and properly diagnose, I'm using air quotes here, the problem they're seeing and not miscategorize it. I believe we have a category issue a lot of times with root causes and label, you know what I mean? Where we say it's situational awareness when it could be complacency, and even though it might be subtle, the prescription could be completely different, and we don't want to be trying to have the right solution to the wrong problem type of thing. So how can complacency look, or do you have examples of some cases, maybe some famous cases, or recent cases that can help us illustrate, like, oh, this is what complacency looks like versus situational awareness?
So I'll give you the way we think about it at Taproot. We kind of think about it from, the first thing we look at is it's under our management system. So we think of it as complacency is something that management has control to fix. It's management has the ability to think about this and correct behavior, and it's responsibility of management to do so. So when we look at rules, we first want to make sure that we have a rule and that it's good. Now we're going to assume for this case that that's the case. We've got a standard, we've got rules, we've got a process, and it works. If
Mhm.
it's followed, it works. But somebody violated that, so they broke that standard, that policy, and we need to understand why. So we break it up into first saying, okay, do they know the policy?
Right.
Because sometimes people break rules that they didn't know were rules, right? So there might be those scenarios where people are breaking rules and they just didn't know. And that could be a factor of communication, right? We as an organization aren't communicating those rules well. There can also be rules that were changed recently. So I'm used to doing it this way, but they've now added a new thing. I'll give you an example of this that is a famous example. There's a documentary called Oh, let's see if I can remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's about the missile silo that they blew up, the nuclear missile silo that they blew up out in the West.
West, yeah.
Um, I want to say it's Command and Control is the documentary.
Okay.
I would recommend it. It's really good. But what happened in that scenario? They had a rule, they had a piece of equipment and tooling they were using. And it was basically, I think, of this big socket set, right? And they use that to undo this thing. And the head on this thing, basically, it weighed like 20 pounds. It was huge, a big, heavy socket. And it came off the tool. And they were having problems with this socket set. And so they decided to change the tool. And they recently did that. And this person that was going to do this maintenance work on this nuclear missile, um, it was just recently changed and they forgot the new piece of equipment. So it's recently changed and they had forgotten it. And so, well, they were already all through these doors and process and at the nuclear missile basically to get ready to do their work. So they decided to go back to the old way of doing things.
Right.
And if you watch that documentary, you'll find out what happens when they go back to the old way of doing things. I won't spoil it, but I'll just say it wasn't a good thing that happened.
So that could be one reason why is a recent change. They're either unaware of a rule or something changed in a process, and maybe they were told, but dare I say, muscle memory, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
this, we fall right back into that non-thinking mode, right? Where I just instinctively know how to do this because I've been doing it, over time, and you kind of fall into that category. Um, and you're so what's interesting is you say this is a management system, and I
Mm-hmm.
agree. This has been the biggest challenge I think for us in this industry is getting organizations to understand that these are all management system failures, what we're looking at. Like, and I think managers with the best intentions fail to make that connection a lot of times when they say situational awareness, wasn't paying attention, complacency. And it's like, okay, we're going to coach that person again, but this is a management system failure. Get kind of like what makes it a management system failure, and why is that important for an organization to understand, what complacency is? Let's just keep going on that, because
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of managers miss this. Like, oh, Blaine wasn't paying attention. Oh, what are you going to do?
So a lot of times we think of it as people breaking rules as a personal problem, right? That's a moral failure. If you were a good moral and just person, you always follow all the rules. And that's probably true for something like, murder, right?
Right.
That's a moral thing, right? We got to there's a question of morality. But when it comes to the operation and the tasks of a job, a lot of times leaders think I pay you a salary and that's why you do the job the way I tell it to you. And that's what people believe that they're doing is I'm paying you a salary so you're going to follow all the rules I tell you to. But in reality, what you're paying people for is to get the job done. And
Yeah.
people are always looking for the most efficient way to get the job done. So when we think about complacency, a lot of times we think of it as people are being lazy, but in a lot of times it's people are following what motivates them. So one of the next things that we think about, and this is where we can kind of get into that motivational thing and from a leadership
Yeah.
level, is enforcement. How we enforce rules makes it more or less likely that people are going to follow them. Now, when I say how we enforce rules, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? How we enforce rules? What would come to your mind for that?
Well, negative reinforce. I would say a negative response to, hey, stop doing that or don't do that.
Yeah, so that's the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is negative reinforcement. That might be a critique on our management culture. I don't know. But when we think about enforcement, negatives is probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Right.
And I remember he was actually a sort of a mini mentor of mine. It was early in my career, and he came up and was talking about getting people to follow rules. And he said, you got to bust their ass sometimes. You gotta get on them, and you gotta make sure that you stay on them, or else they're gonna slip. And they're right about that, because you've got to have a negative enforcement. There's got to be consequences for not following the rule. But what we've seen is negative consequences are not the best motivators. So let me give you an example that kind of walks through this.
Okay.
Do you ever speed while driving?
Plead the fifth. We use this a lot in our root cause classes too.
Yep.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I think everybody does.
Yeah. So
Technically speaking, like if it's 35, technically you do 36, you're speeding. It doesn't
yep.
matter
No,
like
so
at
we
that
we
point,
break
right?
we break the rule. Is it because we don't know the law?
Well, so
Most of us.
most of the time.
Most.
I've been on a road where I'm like, what? Where was the last speed limit sign?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
So
there's
there's
so
that
much
recently.
visual clutter. Sometimes I don't remember, but that's another problem, right? So
That recently changed, right? That maybe the speed limit recently changed and you don't know it. That could be. But most of the time we speed, it's not because we don't know the speed
correct.
limit. Most of the time we speed, it's because we are think we get there faster. Or it's fun, right? Driving fast is fun. There's some people we can't drive 55.
Right. Sammy
So
Hagar. Oh, you're taking me way back.
so you look at your speeding, right? And you're thinking about, well, how do I change people's behavior? If everybody wants to speed, well, what's our negative incentive? What have we decided as a society we're going to do to stop people from speeding?
Randomly pull people over.
We're going
Have
to
a
hope
police
that we
officer.
catch them in the middle of it, and then
Right.
we can give them a ticket.
Yes.
Um,
After the
or
fact.
the other option is survival of we give the Darwin Awards out to those that really can't figure this out. They go too fast, and then you die in a fiery crash. Um, so those are negative incentives, dying in a fiery crash and might get a ticket. We've got positive incentives of we think we get there faster and it's fun. So when we think about incentive structure, we need to think about soon, certain, and positive, and soon, certain, and negative.
Ah,
So every time I speed, soon and certain, I think I get there faster. I feel I get there faster. You may not actually, but you feel like you do.
mhm.
Save a couple seconds, right? So there's that feeling that you get there faster. It's a soon, certain, positive. On the other side, we might get caught, and we might get a ticket, and we might have to pay that ticket. That's late, uncertain, and negative.
Gotcha.
So when you've got your incentive structures aligned so that people follow not following the rules get a positive incentive, and following the rules they get an uncertain negative incentive, you have a recipe for non-compliance, which is why basically everybody speeds.
Yeah. It's a numbers
So
game. Like they can't pull everybody over.
they can't they
And
can't pull everybody
yeah.
over.
And the likelihood, statistically speaking, the likelihood that I'm going to get into a wreck versus somebody else, I mean, it's so far removed from most drivers' minds. Oh, that doesn't happen to me. And in the workplace, we see that all the time. I had an old captain, fire captain, used to use this phrase, pardon the expression, but he would say, everybody who dies at work dies surprised. I mean, that's the point, because I think you're right. If they would have known or thought that that was highly likely for to happen to them, that would have shifted that incentive structure, and they wouldn't have done it. That would have been an priority incentive for them, right? Oh, I'm pretty certain that this is going to end badly for me. I'm not going to do that, but they didn't. That's the point, right?
My favorite management technique, and this is favorite management technique, is discipline the guy that just hurt himself,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Discipline the person that got this guy lost a finger. Oh, we got to discipline him. We got to write him up. I don't think he's going to do it again. I don't think he is.
Oh,
He
and
lost a
worse,
finger doing
we'll
this last
we'll
time.
write them up, and then we'll
Yep.
make them the safety rep
Oh
for
yeah.
yeah, for the
Shame
company.
them. You got to shame them. They
Yeah,
have to. They have to publicly admit their failure to everybody and tell them about it. Yeah.
right.
Got to
Yeah.
shame and discipline. They're great motivators.
Oh, that scene from Game of Thrones where they're walking down the
Yeah,
we're
shame,
thinking about
shame.
shame, shame. Yeah, there you go.
So when we think about enforcement, there's kind of different levels of it here. So as an organization, sometimes we okay people to break rules. right? We give them, reasons. You might have a supervisor that's like, "Hey guys, we've got to get this done today, so we're going to skip this thing we normally do." Right? We're not going to do the briefing today. You guys know what you need to do. We're really in a hurry. We've got to get this done. Or, hey, we've got to get this truck loaded in a certain amount of time and we're running close. So do it as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And that somebody's now going to be speeding. They're going to be taking shortcuts, right? So there's sometimes things that we as management okay in emergencies or in opportunities for us to try to meet our goals. So leadership can okay those things. And what is that telling? What positive or negative is that telling people? Well, it's telling them that if you break this rule, you're getting a reward, a bonus.
Right.
You're known as the fast operator. You're known as the guy that can get it done without the procedure. You're smart, you're so quick, you don't even need the procedure. Well, you're violating the rules that you've put in place, and you've set in a structure where you're okaying deviance and
Mhm.
where you're okaying people to be complacent and say, okay, we don't need that rule because we're good operators. So again, those incentives kind of come in and they change the way that people are behaving.
Yeah. Now, do you think that modern, I would say modern, but or current leadership development training that organizations use, by and large, they're homegrown for the most part, right? Most organizations come up with their own way of developing their leaders, or probably more often than not, lack thereof.
Yep.
They hire, like, that's going to be your next manager, by the way, the one that's always, beating everybody else's rate. It's getting things done faster than everybody else, doing more of, with less. That will promote those folks. And now you can see how that happens. But do you think that is a failure of, like, leadership development, that whole industry, on the operations and management side, where there isn't a focus on these types of topics, not just safety, but like some of this is organizational psychology, industrial psychology, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think there is a gap. Um, and I when you have good leaders versus bad leaders, right? There's no such thing. Well, there definitely is.
Yeah.
There's leaders that understand motivating and understand incentives, and there's ones that don't. And you can definitely tell the difference when you've been under both. Likewise, there's leaders that understand what it takes to get the job done versus not. And again, performance, all of these factors are things that you have to train. When
Hmm.
I became a supervisor, when I became a manager, I didn't know these topics. And I was fortunate that I had a good coach as a plant manager that at least taught me one of the elements that's so critical to this is leadership being on the floor
Right.
and being present. And so a lot of that training does trickle in to a lot of different things of being present and going out. But I think there's nothing out there that does a very good job of laying it as it's not a personal leadership problem. A lot of times we think of leadership and we think of it's management failure that we're
Hmm.
not doing a good job of incentives, or it's management failure that we're not auditing well. And so, people in their RCAs are afraid to even look at these categories because who wants to go back and say, well, our management isn't doing a very good job of managing? They don't,
Or
they're scared to say something like that.
right. Or worse, it's the manager, because a lot of organizations do this, who is going to lead the deep dive, the root cause analysis. When one of the workers is injured, we put it on the direct manager, the
Yep.
supervisor. Do you think a supervisor is going to be that
Be
vocally
objective.
self-critical?
Yeah, be objective and self-critical. No, they
No.
may not even ask the questions about the management system.
And it's not
So,
because they're hiding it. I think because you're right. It's almost a um dare I use an inappropriate term, a blindness to,
yeah.
they can't see that
What's
right
your
now.
bias, right? Your own
It's a
internal
bias.
bias to the thing you're doing. And so we think of management systems. So we got our own category. If you go to TapRooT training, you'll learn about it. But
Mhm.
we have our own category, and we say it's not the blame management category. It's the category that management has control over.
Right.
We can change what we do as management and the way that we communicate things, the way we enforce things, and the way we set accountability to things. We have control over these things of how we do this. So when we think from a perspective of getting people to follow rules, we want to look at motivation and we want to look at what we're doing to make sure that we're enforcing those rules. So there's other thing on motivation. And there's a way that your listeners can go out and they can look at motivation when people are breaking rules. You want to look at the four main motivators. There's more than just four, but these are the four main ones, and it's time, effort, enforcement, and bonus.
Aha.
So, time, I want to do things that save me time. I want to do things that are the least effort. I want to do things that don't get me in trouble, or how I might get in trouble might affect my behavior. That's enforcement. And I want to do things that get me bonuses, right? And I don't mean bonuses as in like, end of year
Cash
bonus. I'm
flow. Right.
saying it might be an extra long break. If I do it this way, I can get it done quicker and I get a longer break. That's a bonus.
I get a shout out at the next startup meeting of how
That's a
good I did.
bonus.
Yes.
So we can look at how time, effort, enforcement, and bonus can influence people's behavior. Now, we teach a technique for this. It's basically we fill out a little chart for it to have people look at the old behavior and the new behavior. And you
Mhm.
can compare those two to see what you can change to make the time more timely to do the right thing, the effort less effort to do it the right way, the enforcement to give clear guidance and structure, and the negative incentives necessary to do it the right way.
Mhm.
And the bonuses are positive. And
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways you can go about putting positive incentives in place to get people to follow rules.
Mhm.
So we take back to that car example, right? The speeding that we were doing.
Yeah, I was thinking of that same one when you were talking just then, because I got a good example of how we did that in our household.
So
Go
how
ahead.
did you do it in your household? I want to hear your
Um,
household one first.
so with both children and my wife and myself, because both our children are still on our insurance, we simply used the app that the insurance company provides, and we get a 6% discount. So our children are old enough. My daughter certainly is at 22 and still on our auto insurance. She's going to college. And my son, who's 17, still obviously under our auto insurance. But we make them pay a portion of their auto insurance. You know, they both work, and my son, even though he's a senior this year, he's got a job. He's the real responsible. So it's something as parents we said, okay, let's get you used to doing these things, paying bills, being responsible. Well, the discount comes into play here. So we get an incentive, a positive incentive for safe drive. I'm using air quotes here, safe driving habits. The app knows if you're picking up your phone while you're driving and interacting with it. It knows if you're speeding. So it's speeding and distracted driving are the two big categories, and you get dinged points. So if we have to hit a score 100% being 100% safe or not distracted, I think you have to have 90 or better, something like that, and we can get up to 6% off each month of our premium. And so we pass that on to the kids. We say, you want to save money, this is how we're going to track your behavior, and we share in our group text. I know it sounds goofy, but we'll, like, my daughter did this. Yeah, she's like, hey, I'm safer than the rest of you, because I had to have the phone even on speakerphone. By the way, it will hands free, it will still log that as a distracted, because and I agree with this, not to go down that rabbit hole, but I had to be on with a tech while I was driving out to my camper to go over an issue we were having with the camper. Um, that that took away some points from me, and so my daughter had some bragging rights of, like, she got the highest score. Anyway, that's how we did that. We shifted that to it's soon, meaning it's every month. We're watching it all the time, and it's positive, like, because they can get a discount. we don't get charged more by not meeting that goal, but we just won't get the discount. So there you go. That's how
Yes.
we did it.
So it's a good version. I call it a late. I love those because they're late, certain, positive and negative, right? They've
Yep.
got both.
Yep.
And a lot of reasons why people don't do them is because they think it's really a secret negative incentive, not a positive incentive.
Yeah.
But I always like to use this example. If you could install the device on your car that basically just tracks your speed
Mhm.
above or below the speed limit. Doesn't do the distracted, doesn't do any of those things. It just tracks your speed. And if you go above the speed limit, it charges you money. If you stay below the speed limit, it gives you money, right? And you
Yeah.
could have a little thing sitting on the dash, a little number counter that counts you're positive or negative right now. And it would give you that. And you'd hear the cha-ching, 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 or dun, 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 if you're going to bed or by. And that would immediately change your behavior, immediately change it. A lot of people in my class, when I talk about this, I could see it in their eyes. They sit and calculate how many miles would I have to drive, and if maybe I'm doing Uber too, I could probably I can quit my job and make money just driving this car around that they talk about.
Right.
What people think about with this, a lot of people worry about the secret negatives, the negative bonuses, right? Why do people not install that app that's going to get them 6% savings if they follow the rules? Well, it's those negative bonuses, right? They want to get on their phone and be on phone calls or need to. They want to be distracted and drive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is cell phones such a problem? It's because they're addictive. And then so people want to look at them while you're sitting at a red light. So those kind of things, when we think about putting those kind of policies in our companies and those kind of devices in our companies, we have to evaluate, okay, is this going to be creating the positive behaviors we want because it's enforcing the rules? And what are those unintended negative bonuses? So I know a lot of companies that have the distracted driver stuff that they've put in their trucks. They've
Mhm.
got things that they have that they're tracking employees while driving fork trucks or other monitoring devices. And you have to then look at, okay, what are some of the scenarios where we've created an incentive that's gone wrong? So
Right.
let's think about incentives that we think are intentionally good but might be driving bad behavior. Um, what are some positive incentives that you can think of that a company's rolled out? What are some that you think of that come to your mind?
What safe driving awards, like these delayed, I call them somewhat delayed rewards. But if your accident, something as generic as accident free, no tickets, we pull your license once every 6 months or whatever, you have no point, like, and you get a bonus, right? You that's probably the easiest one to point out. Just these, what they call safe driving bonuses type of thing.
Yep. Yeah, the
Yeah,
attaboy cards.
yeah,
We used to give out in my plant, we used to give out gas cards and Walmart gift cards. Yeah, those were valuable at the time. People, we had a Walmart like two seconds from our plant, so I mean, people loved those. Um, but suddenly our policies changed, and our corporate wouldn't allow us to give out Walmart gift cards and gas cards anymore. They now had company dollars, and you could
yeah.
spend those company dollars at the company store. And the
Oh,
company store had prizes that you could purchase with your company bucks.
yeah.
But I never felt they were good prizes, and no one else did either because they were hard to use. And the prizes kind of felt like you were buying like the cheap version, the cheap version that you just didn't, it was going to be crappy.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like good stuff. You weren't getting like name brand. You kind of got these weird off brands. And so suddenly what was a valuable item I was giving people for attaboys became significantly less valuable. And the incentives that were happening of people feeling rewarded for being found with good behavior or found following rules, now it didn't mean the same. And
Yeah.
yeah, they still appreciated me thanking them because people appreciate leadership, recognizing their activity.
Mhm.
But they also appreciate, a Walmart gift card a lot.
Right.
And so those kind of things, you can see how what was once a good system for rewarding people, just by slightly tweaking it to make it fit for whatever the company. I don't remember. I don't know why. I wasn't at corporate. So I don't know
Yeah.
why they made it where we couldn't do the thing we wanted to do, but they had a policy, and so suddenly it changed the incentive structure in the area, and we
Yeah.
had to get creative with new ways of rewarding people because, well, a $50 at the company store wasn't as good as $20 at Walmart.
Right.
The
Yeah,
other
we
thing,
did, I did a whole episode on incentives, and so it sounds like we're kinda and I know where you're going with this. It ties directly into one of the ways we can fight complacency, right?
Mhm.
Is that incentive structure that is inherently built into well, society, and it can be something as structured as what we're talking about as this in this example, a structured incentive program, a purposeful incentive program, or these cultural incentives or productivity incentives, these sort of unseen, unwritten incentives that are baked into life, right? I'm going to get there faster. That's an incentive. Um, I did that, and what comes to mind is I've never been a fan of like delayed, like, there used to be these cards, these like jackpot cards, scratch off cards, where you have to spell jackpot. And every time you did something good, it'd give you a card, and then it was a chance to get a reward. There was no
yeah,
guarantee
yeah,
you would even get it. You had to collect all these. And somebody who could just get lucky and spell out jackpot or bingo or whatever they're called. There's bingo cards like this. And I've been doing it longer, and I just haven't hit that G. I need the G to spell bingo, and this person got it before me and just started. So I was never a big fan of that. Those typically backfire. If you're going to reward somebody, just do it. Just immediately, like you said, soon, right? It's got to be immediate. And then I recognize that a lot of companies miss these three C's, right? Communication, choice, and culture. A lot of companies miss the culture part. It depends on what region of the country you're in, the type of workers you have. you know uh Field and the Field and Stream gift card is going to go a lot further than maybe a gas gift card, or heck, depends on the price of gas. A gas gift card is like gold, right? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. You've got to make sure that you don't break the incentive inadvertently by ignoring, giving them a choice, not focusing on the culture, what they respond to and what they value, and or communicating the purpose and intent of the whole thing. But getting back to fighting complacency, these are all things that what you said earlier, these are all within the organization's control in some way. It's whether or not the organization understands this or has the knowledge. Well, then we have to go get that, right? The organization has to develop that. So what do you recommend for, like, how can an organization recognize something it doesn't understand or doesn't see? How do you get around that? Like a manager who doesn't know they're motivating the wrong behavior.
So
Does that
I
make sense?
think that's something that as a company, there's two things you've got to do, which is you're auditing in two different ways.
Mhm.
And so I always say audit, but it's oversight, coaching, employee relations. So we have to communicate these things, and there's two ways you do communication to organizations. The first way you do communication is you tell people things, right? So you have plant meetings, you have um, longer rollouts that leadership does, and in those you have to talk about your values. What is it that as a company you value? Um, what is your core beliefs as a company? So um, when we think about communication of value, we call it the two-way street in Taproot, because we have to communicate values to employees, and employees have to feel comfortable to bring us problems.
Right.
They have to feel comfortable to communicate problems to management, that management has a rapport with people, that it can hear, communicate value and hear problems. So there's that element that we can communicate. And I think a lot of organizations feel they do this okay. They feel they talk and say the right things, right?
Mhm.
Quality is number one important to us. And quality is everyone's responsibility, not just the quality groups. It's all of our response. Right? We think we've communicated that well, but the side to that you have to have, and if you really want to know if you're truly doing it, it is the hands-on side. Where I said that plant manager that I admire, that kind of taught me this, was he would communicate, but he would always go and see too. So if we had an RCA that was reported out, right, we had corrective actions that were going to be put in place. It wasn't that day. Sometimes that day he would go out and look, depends on what it was. But within a week of us reporting this out, guaranteed, almost, you could put a dot on, if you really knew his schedule, you could put a dot on when he was going to go look at it. But he would go out and check your corrective action. Why? Because he believed that when we said we're going to fix something, we get it done, and we
Right.
get it done to completion. And so those kind of things, that going out and, walking the walk, not just talking it, but walking it,
Walking it.
you've got to have both of those. You have to communicate the importance so people understand the why, and then you've got to be there and be present to reinforce it. So going back to that Rickover quote I started with, um, Rickover believed it was only the commanding officer, only the captain of the ship, that could affect the culture of the whole ship, and that culture starts at the top of leadership,
Mhm.
and so that you set that going down. And so as leaders, we've all been leaders in different levels of an organization. You've got to realize, well, how I respond and how I go out and set that example is how everyone below me will feel they should act.
Mhm.
And so you've got to set that example. So I think a lot of times as organizations, they think if I tell them to follow the rules, that will help them be better. I'm going to counsel them to be more careful and tell them it's really important, and discipline them by telling them really fiercely that they've got to follow that rule. But I think we often misunderstand the role of leadership in going to the floor and being present, not just being present as there, but being present as showing what you care about.
Right.
What I go to the floor and talk to people about, what I go to the floor and engage about, that's what people will believe when I tell them it's important.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of things that leaders have to really balance, is how do they go out and demonstrate what they care for? And how do you be conscious of what are you demonstrating that you care for when you're out on the floor? And that's
Yeah, I
something
think
that we've got to challenge.
oh, absolutely. And I think I used to tell folks that, it doesn't matter how big your budget is or how big or small your company is, the most valuable thing you have that everybody has, whether they realize it or not, to invest is their time. Just sometimes that is worth, or many times that's worth a lot more than anything you're saying. And you just go out and demonstrate it. And because that, if the plant manager, the ops manager, if they're willing to spend their time of all the things they could choose to do that need to get done, they're choosing to do this. This signals to me, whether I consciously recognize it or not, that's what they care about. This is something that they care about, that they want to see done the right way. I think I think you're right. Going back to what you said, we often mistake. Well, I told them, and but then you go out and you look at the production floor, the production area, you just look at the how work gets done, and it's 180 degrees out of phase of what we're saying. Well, that's the problem. You can't just say it. And we often enforce the rules, like you said. It's delayed. We didn't say anything all those other days they were doing it this way because nothing bad happened. We only do it or enforce, and that's a mistake. I think it's human nature, but that's a mistake a lot of us make in organizations, is we only decide to enforce, quote unquote, enforce a rule or a procedure when there's a negative outcome that hurts the company, or hurts, and hurting the employee hurts the company, certainly. And and workers can misread that like it's willful, or they don't care and they're only enforcing it because I filed a claim or workers comp rates again. And that's not my experience. That's not what it is. It's what we've been talking about is a lot of managers just don't know or don't understand how that happened and what that looks like and the risk of only enforcing when something negative we have a negative outcome. But as long as there's a positive outcome, we got stuff done, we got stuff produced, we got
Yep.
stuff shipped, and we don't say anything. That's that's the trap of like, were we safe today? Well, nobody got injured. Yeah, but were we safe?
Yep.
Right? I didn't ask. I didn't ask that. Were there any incidents today or accidents today, um, or reported? I should say. But yeah, I think being present out on the floor is going to be way more valuable than just looking at lagging indicators at the end of the day, at the end of the shift, and going, well, nobody reported any first aids or OSHA recordable incidents. Good day. Maybe
Yeah, was
not.
that safe? Is that safe or lucky? Was that safe or lucky that day,
It's
right?
lucky. Yes, it's exactly
Yeah.
right. That's we got lucky because chances are, if you're not out there, right, present on the floor, you have no idea how they're doing the work,
So I,
right?
I I think of something for supervisors, right? Because we put a lot of things on different people, but if you took the time and plotted your leadership schedule,
Mhm.
and I've done this exercise with my supervisors in the past, and I've done it as a manager. You just take your time in the day, you break it into 5 or 15 minute increments, depending on how your schedule looks. And just every 15 minutes, you record what you were doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Mhm.
It's okay to mark, I was talking with someone for 15 minutes. That's a thing. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at how much time are you spending on what. And like you said, time is so important. I had my supervisors do this, and what I found was they were spending almost 50% of their time doing administrative tasks,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
paperwork, time cards, things that somebody has given them. And if 50% of your supervisor's time is just administrative work, they're not on the floor. They're not checking and catching problems. They're not fixing things and making work so smoothly. They're doing paperwork, and that's not what you want from a leadership level. So again, we want to think about these different elements and look at what is it as administrative time, how are we spending our time, and where is it going? And think about how those incentives, that bonus, that enforcement, how all of those elements that we could be putting in place affect that. Now, there is one other element that I want to mention when it comes to following rules, and it's accountability.
Yeah.
And when I say accountability, a lot of people think, they think responsibility as far as, do I know who to point the finger at when they screwed up? But
Being
when I mean
held
accountability,
accountable. Yeah, right.
yeah, I think held accountable. When I
Yes.
say accountability, it's do I know that I am responsible for this task? So I'll give you an example from mine. We had a problem where employees weren't checking a feature they needed to check. And when we look at responsibility, they did not know it was their responsibility to check that. So when we think about people and the rules themselves, knowing that the rule applies to them, not just that it applies, but it applies to them, is important, and understanding their accountability in that rule. So if you're going to get people to follow rules, you need to make sure that they know the rule and that they know that it exists. You need to make sure that as leadership, you're enforcing it in the right way, meaning we don't just enforce it when someone breaks the rule, we enforce it consistently day in and day out, that we have leadership support, and that we are looking at that to make sure that the time, effort, enforcement, and bonuses are aligned with the behaviors we want, and that we need to make sure that the accountability is clear so that people know they're responsible for these elements of the rule.
Mhm.
And we as leadership can see their responsibility and know that that specific person is responsible. And
Yeah.
when you do that, you can get a higher level of performance. You have to do something special if you want people to not become complacent. You've got to be disciplined about your leadership's involvement in those rules.
So complacency, it sounds like, obviously it's different than situational awareness because of those three inputs. Those, I have to receive information. I have to be aware it has to come in. I have to be able to process it, and then I have to be able to project. Like, hey, this is what it means. This
Yep.
is what could happen. I have to be able to have that foresight project so that I can course correct or avoid that thing. Um, so situational awareness, complacency is a little different because you're saying it's about motivation in large part. It's
Hmm.
about motivation, which is why we spent so much time, I think, talking about everything's from like incentives, feedback, presence on the floor, and I got to throw this one out there, and it's included with what we talked about, but I want to make sure I'm very specific for anybody watching or listening. We have to be able to also demonstrate that which we're asking others to do.
Hmm.
So if managers or supervisors or safety professionals are ever out there working in a process path alongside our associates, we're showing that we can go out and work with them. We also have to be demonstrating those expectations.
Yep.
We don't want to rush, right? Um, Violate the single piece flow type of policies, or lifting, or operating equipment. Those all those rules that we put on and communicate to our workers, we have to also be able to demonstrate ourselves. Because you're right, I think we can be consistent on all those other fronts, and then once a week we go out there and work and we demonstrate the wrong thing, even for 15 minutes. Sometimes it's all it takes. And then everybody's like, "Oh, look at Blaine. He's not even following." And everybody likes to catch the safety person, by the way, not putting on
Oh,
the gloves or something like that.
I
So,
was proud. I was proud when my operators felt comfortable enough to call me out for if I walked onto the floor and didn't have my glasses,
right.
or I didn't have gloves. They would immediately, and I was like, "That's good. I
That is a
love
good
that
thing.
culture." I always reward. I was like, "Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right." So yeah, culture. It's complacency. Fighting complacency is about making sure you can communicate the why we have this rule, that you can demonstrate and with your actions that's important to you as a leader, and that you can align the incentives, the motivators that makes it easier to follow the rule, harder to break the rule.
Goes back
And
to what
if
you
you're
said about human factors, right? It's got to be
Yep,
easy to do right, hard to do wrong.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so if that's the thing that we have in place, you're going to get compliance and following the rule. If they don't know the why, if you're not out there showing that it's important, and if it's easier to do it the wrong way, you will get people to break the rule every time.
There you go. Good night. Oh man, great topic. I think we covered a lot. I know we've got a couple of other topics for some other episodes that kind of string these along, but I definitely think that we need to tackle these almost like separately so that we can kind of build, so folks can listen and digest and take all this stuff in. So I like that we're kind of breaking these out separate little pieces, because we could have easily just crammed complacency, situational, like into one generic topic, but when you get too high level, you lose
We
sight
go
of
to
some of the
we go
details.
another 2 hours. We go.
Yeah. So, Alex, thanks again for joining us. Anybody watching or listening, go to taproot.com. That's the best place to find out more about Taproot.
Best place to find out.
All right.
And
And
reach out,
also,
reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn.
yes, LinkedIn. And I'm not paid to say any of this, by the way. Not this. There's no affiliation. There's no like business relationship between the podcast and Taproot. But I will say, but you go to taproot.com, sign up give up your email. They don't spam you or anything like that. I've never gotten any stuff from Taproot that I didn't want. But the newsletter, like there's really good information from Taproot in the newsletter, and
Yep,
every
goes
once in a
out
while,
once a week.
funny thing. Yeah, once a week. Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
we do.
All right.
It's got the funny thing of the week, an incident of the week, and then always interesting topics.
Always interesting topics, and you can stay current on any of the conferences, trainings, things that they've got going on around the not just the country, around the world. Right? You guys are like everywhere.
Yep, yep. We got global footprint. Yeah, and if you want to get a cool Hawaiian shirt like this,
There you go. You gotta, yeah,
you gotta
again,
come
those,
you gotta come to the summit or somewhere else.
that's right. Those listening, you got to go check out the video. The link is in the show notes to see, if anything, just see Alex's shirt.
Just to admire the shirt.
That's it. I'm in awe of that shirt right now, Alex. All right. Hey, happy Friday to you, brother. I thank you so much again for joining me and sharing this great information.
My pleasure.
All right, there you have it. A conversation once again with Alex from TapRooT. A really good topic. It's a very common, complacency is very common. I'm always interested to learn like the psychology behind some of these common root causes, these quote unquote blame tags that we apply to workers that are involved in incidents, not paying attention, lack of situational awareness, in this case, complacency. All right. If you liked what you heard, let him know on LinkedIn. Call out Alex on a post, share this episode, or just reach out to TapRooT and see what they have to offer. They're always running classes on how you can improve your incident investigations, your deep dives. So go ahead and show some love to the TapRooT folks as well. Again, to watch the video of this interview, click on the show notes to head over to the Safety Pro Podcast community site, and also grab your copy of Rethinking Safety Culture. Explore how safety standard work can be effectively integrated into daily routines, fostering a collective commitment to safety from top to bottom, as well as how to measure your success. Again, Rethinking Safety Culture. Grab your copy today. Link is also in the show notes, and we will talk to you on the next Safety Pro Podcast.